Hey guys, tonight we're going to uncover a secret that has been buried for over 400 years, a story that history has deliberately concealed, a truth not everyone dares to speak. What if I told you that Queen Elizabeth I, one of England's greatest monarchs, died with a secret so horrifying that it was buried 2 times? Once in her coffin, and again in the silence of those who witnessed it? Imagine a symbol of power and perfection. Yet behind the magnificent portraits and elegant gowns, her body was silently decaying. The secret of deformities, a mysterious illness, and an internal ravaging was brutally covered up because it was too politically dangerous to be revealed. This isn't just a story about the death of a queen. This is a journey to find a forgotten truth, an exploration of the collapse of a lie that solidified the power of an entire empire. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what the time is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the year 1603, Richmond Palace lay shrouded in such deep silence that you could hear the velvet curtains whisper as they swayed and the slow, measured breathing of the flickering candles. The jet-black draperies were drawn tight, blocking every ray of dawn, leaving only a murky space that felt both mysterious and fraught with tension. One by one, the Queen's attendants slipped through those curtains, not merely as servants, but as devoted worshippers of a living legend. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, who had once sent ripples across all of Europe, but today, the face beneath that legend bore none of the regal confidence of an empress. Instead, there lay a horrifying secret. As the attendants gently, meticulously removed her crimson velvet gowns, her lace, her silks, each thread peeled back, as though they feared disturbing the terror lurking in every seam they held their breath. Next came the jeweled wig, once the very symbol of power and wealth. When it was lifted, it revealed a mask of white lead paint, so finely applied that it had been advertised as the ultimate beauty secret. Yet in truth it contained poison that seeped slowly through her skin. The first damp cloth pressed to her face unleashed a stench of rot so terrible it swirled like a dry whirlwind. The loudest sounds in the room were the Queen's ragged breaths, the susurration of silk pulled taut over her still form, and the long, mournful sighs of the candles as they burned. Beneath layers of lead-based powder and crimson lipstick, her porcelain-like skin, once celebrated for its flawless whiteness, was mottled with bruises, festering blisters, and scars that had never before been revealed. One royal physician staggered back, knees wobbling. Another dropped to his knees, clutching his rosary and murmuring prayers. We often say, strong as a queen. Yet who could have imagined that behind the glittering crown lay a body silently ravaged for decades? Lead from cosmetics, toxins in perfumes, even the dishes and drinking vessels, all had corroded her flesh. Her liver and kidneys had become as hard as iron, her brain and nervous system damaged, leading to unrelenting headaches. The monarch who once ruled a continent now lay as a mummy of a brutal tragedy. That ghastly tableau echoed through the corridors of power, sowing endless unease. As rumors swirled, can glory and divinity really conceal the rot of the flesh? The court itself panicked and issued an edict of absolute silence. There was to be no mention of the Queen's gruesome death, no hint of the secret autopsy. All damaging documents were ordered destroyed. Anyone who dared leak information faced severe punishment. Yet even a ban could not fully smother the secret. Snippets found their way into whispered anecdotes. A handkerchief stained with lead dust, a portrait capturing her strained expression, or the rumor of a surgeon's razor moving so fast it seemed someone was watching in silence. All of these whispered fragments begged the same question. Are we living within a legend or in a painted nightmare? And even tomorrow, when we extinguish the lights and close our eyes to rest, this story will linger like a cold breeze slipping into our dreams. It reminds us that no matter how high we rise, we cannot escape the fragility of the body. Every human has vulnerabilities, and sometimes the greatest strength lies in acknowledging and sharing those wounds. Just weeks before that fateful dawn, Elizabeth still appeared at grand banquet halls, her smile graceful beneath the flicker of countless candles, a fine porcelain teacup in hand, her countenance betraying not the slightest fatigue. She laughed and bantered with the nobles, trading gentle barbs that had the court entranced, graceful as a water lily drifting across a moonlit pond. Yet amid the laughter and the violin's lingering strains, something unsettling began to creep in. For the first time, she refused to sit upon the ornate chair, set aside for her a gesture so small, yet enough to send a hush through the entire assembly. Whispers spread. "What is wrong with the Queen?" Yet she merely smiled, tilted her head slightly, and stood resolute. Her hands clasped behind her back, her gaze unmoving as if she were studying an invisible painting on the far wall. Not only that, but she absolutely would not lie down when the festivities had ended. Despite shoulders aching and legs trembling, Elizabeth would only pace gently about the chamber, nodding courteously to her guests, then suddenly halt in the center of the room, her eyes fixed upon the tiny cracks in the stone walls. One attendant recalled that whenever candlelight danced upon those fissures, the Queen's expression would flash a moment of sadness, then shift to a chilling intensity, as though conversing with a presence unseen. That same attendant whispered that on occasion Elizabeth would murmur in Latin words too soft to discern, yet enough to send shivers down their spines. Those silent Latin invocations seemed to bridge worlds, leaving listeners uncertain whether to be comforted or alarmed. Elizabeth's eyes began to glow a deep, bloodshot red, the veins at their corners standing out sharply each time she forced herself to maintain composure before the gathered throng. One day, a bold royal physician stepped forward to take her pulse. The moment his hand touched her wrist, Elizabeth ground her teeth and hissed, "I will not yield." Her hoarse whisper echoed unnaturally in the stillness, compelling absolute silence. The only sound was the pounding of her own heartbeat in the physician's ear. Immediately after, she staggered, her head dipping as if struck by faintness. But within a heartbeat, she lifted her chest defiantly, legs quivering as she made her way to a darkened corner of the hall, her gaze directed at some point unseen by any other. Witnesses shivered at the sight. The once invincible Queen, now locked in a silent struggle between life and death. Rumors swept through the court like wind across an open field. Has the Queen been poisoned? Or is she simply exhausted from the burdens of state? Courtiers debated fervently, palace guards exchanged uneasy glances, and commoners who caught wind of the rumors felt a chill. The palace, once suffused with regal dignity, grew thick with an undefinable anxiety. Some claimed her affliction was the result of lead poisoning from her daily cosmetics, toxins creeping into her bloodstream to warp her mind and ravage her body. Others attributed her condition to mental strain, suggesting temporary madness, sleepless nights, and hallucinatory visions. Whatever the cause, the signs of a living nightmare were unmistakable. Elizabeth was unraveling, both physically and mentally, undermining the invincible image she had painstakingly built over decades. All the while, everything unfolded quietly, yet with brutal intensity. Each hesitant step she took, every whispered Latin phrase, every flash of red in her eyes, signaled the approaching crisis. The court scrambled to suppress the news, issuing an edict of absolute silence. No one was to mention the Queen's condition, nor reveal the findings of any examinations. Yet the fear did not dissipate. It flowed silently beneath a veneer of solemnity, waiting to erupt each nightfall within the hushed halls of Richmond Palace. And in that collision of ancient grandeur with human tragedy, a dark chapter was etched into history. Elizabeth, who once stood confidently amid legendary splendor, was now a fragile shadow caught in a storm of secrets and suffering. This story will continue to unfold with more horrifying revelations. But for now, let that image settle deep within your mind as a reminder that behind any glowing halo may lie unspoken pain. When the Queen's body was moved into the antechamber prepared for her funeral rites, the atmosphere grew both hurried and mysterious, as if everyone feared that the slightest sound might awaken the gruesome secrets hidden beneath those silk sheets. First, they gently removed her regal attire, layers of deep crimson velvet that gleamed in the candlelight, panels of intricate lace like crystal spiderwebs. Each pin fastening the hems was carefully undone, one by one, as though peeling away the final screen that concealed a heartbreaking truth. Next, the attendants drew back the soft silk covering the bier, a smooth fabric that had once embraced the body of a sovereign preparing for the ultimate unveiling. I know, the word unveiling alone gives you chills, right? But trust me, this is already spine-tingling. Then came the most terrifying moment of all. A damp cloth, warm water scented faintly with rose was pressed to her face, once painted flawless white and crimson. But instead of gliding smoothly, the lead-based makeup and red rouge cracked and flaked off like old, mouldy wallpaper, peeling away. Chunks of powder scattered like dirty snow, revealing the face beneath utterly unrecognizable. Her skin, once praised as porcelain smooth, was now ashen and mottled with dark bruises, like a bleak map of pain. Blisters had burst, oozing yellowish, clotted pus that resembled a vast, rotting honeycomb. Soft, infected patches wept foul fluid in rivulets, saturating the air with a nauseating stench. And the crude dressings at her chest and abdomen were soaked through with murky, congealed blood, the fabric stained deep crimson. The lead in her cosmetics, a poison she applied daily to preserve her timeless beauty, had silently destroyed her skin, corroded her cells, and seeped into her bloodstream, ravaging her liver and kidneys. By the time the final examination took place, her liver and kidneys were as hard as stone, devoid of any elasticity, a grim testament to the price of excessive beauty rituals. One trembling royal physician struggled to record every horrifying detail, each bruise, each patch of pus, but his hand shook so violently that his handwriting lurched across the page. Nearby, another physician could not hold back tears. He dropped to his knees, clutching his rosary, muttering prayers of absolution. I imagine they must have wondered aloud, "We swore to remain silent. How can we stay silent before such horror?" Every small detail stood as an indictment of the pride that had fostered her demise. The jeweled wig, once a symbol of power and wealth, now nestled in a box, useless to save that fragile life. The crimson velvet, once the very cloak of authority, now merely a shroud masking a merciless truth. From the pinnacle of glory, she had fallen into a tragic victim of the very power she wielded. Just imagine you were the one chosen to perform this rite. Candlelight flickers dimly, the hush as dense as the walls of a secret vault, and the only sound is the rustle of silk. Your heart pounds so fiercely you fear it will burst. Then, you must tug back the final sheet, unveiling the face once celebrated as the epitome of beauty, now revealed as a casualty of lead poisoning, necrosis, and silent torture. This spectacle was more than a mere post-mortem examination. It was the moment when authority and pride collided with invisible agony. With each layer of clothing removed, one step closer was taken to a harsh reality. With every flake of lead paint that fell away, a stark warning of the cost of beauty and fame. And as the physicians recorded their observations, their tears fell not simply from pity, but from the realization how many more secrets remain hidden, waiting to be exposed. All right, friends, buckle up because this next chapter is where things get really intense. As soon as the gruesome truth reached the Privy Council's ears, an emergency decree of absolute silence swept through the palace like a thunderstorm. Picture this: courtiers stumbling over each other in hushed panic, eyes darting, lips sealed or else. From the grandest hallways to the tiniest antechambers, not a single soul was permitted to mention anything except the Queen's glory and victories. First up, armed guards were posted around the death chamber, gleaming pikes, breastplates polished to a mirror shine, musketeers standing so rigid you'd think they'd been turned to stone. These weren't for show. They were there to keep curious whispers from escaping, and to ensure that any nosy servant or wayward diplomat wouldn't sneak a peek or a story past those sentinel eyes. Meanwhile, the Queen's closest attendants were summarily reassigned. The ladies-in-waiting, who had tended her final moments, found themselves shipped off to distant outposts, some to the remote castles along the Scottish border, others to embassies abroad, ostensibly on urgent diplomatic missions. Imagine their luggage: a single hastily stuffed trunk, a stack of fresh gloves, and no explanation beyond, "Your services are needed elsewhere." Talk about a one-way ticket to Oblivionville. Outside the palace gates, even foreign envoys were warned very discreetly that any discussion of Elizabeth's true condition would be considered tantamount to treason. The new King James VI of Scotland, now also James I of England, was counselled in quiet chambers. "Sire, under no circumstances speak of the cause of death. Your realm's Protestant faith hangs in the balance. Because you see, Elizabeth wasn't just a ruler, she was the unwavering bulwark of the English Reformation, the living symbol of Protestant resolve against a rising tide of Catholic resurgence. If word of her decayed body ever got out, imagine broadsheets splashed with gruesome woodcuts of her rotting flesh. Both internal and external enemies would pounce like vultures. Papal sympathizers and Catholic agents would shout from the rooftops that God himself had turned his back on the heretic queen. Spanish agents, still smarting from the Armada's defeat, would gleefully trumpet divine retribution. It was a potential theological catastrophe. The very foundation of Protestant England's legitimacy could crumble in a single scandal. So, yes, silence became the ultimate weapon. The council declared that any mention of the autopsy, the mouldering flesh, or even rumors of poisoning was strictly forbidden. Official proclamations lauded the Queen's undying spirit, her undefeated legacy, and her triumph over foreign fleets. But never once did they hint at the horror beneath that lead-lined coffin. Every speech, every sermon, every chit-chat in the palace corridors was meticulously choreographed to reinforce the myth of an invincible monarch. And it worked, at least on the surface. The courtiers, trained in the art of discretion, mastered the fine line between admiration and ignorance. When tavern-goers in London started to whisper about leaflets depicting Elizabeth's sunken visage, the authorities ordered clandestine searches for any illegal broadsheets. Owners of underground printing presses already proscribed for distributing Catholic pamphlets found themselves accused of slandering the crown. Secret raids, midnight interrogations, and threats of prison or worse became the norm for anyone caught sniffing around royal secrets. Preachers at every parish church were given clear instructions. Sermons must focus on the Queen's battlefield triumphs. Remember the Spanish Armada and her piety. Let us honor her steadfast faith. Any allusion to her final illness or the state of her corpse was strictly prohibited. Bishops sent down missives, reminding clergy that the memory of a perfect sovereign was sacrosanct. To tarnish that memory was to invite chaos in both church and state. All this repression, this wall of silence, had a curious side effect. It strengthened the very myth the council sought to protect. People became more enthralled by the mystery, imagining Elizabeth as a spectral figure, shining eternal in the annals of history. Her portraits, each one more idealized than the last, were reproduced throughout the realm in countless engravings, tapestries, and even devotional medals. The public consumed these images ravenously, eager to believe in the unblemished legend of their beloved queen. In the end, the truth was drowned out beneath layers of ceremonial pomp and scripted glorification. The silence succeeded in its grim purpose. It blurred over the horrific reality and fortified a narrative of unbroken triumph. Elizabeth I emerged not as a fallen mortal, but as an immortal icon, a queen who never truly died, whose power transcended even decay. So there you have it, folks. Silence as the crown's greatest weapon, transforming a harrowing secret into an unassailable legend. It's a stark reminder that sometimes the most dangerous truths are the ones we never speak. And in that hushed palace, with its guards and its decrees, the myth of the undefeated Virgin Queen was sealed tighter than any leaden coffin could ever be. All right, dear friends, settle in and let's tiptoe into the hallowed depths beneath Westminster Abbey where, for centuries, Elizabeth I has rested in lead-lined silence. Imagine her body, once encased in layers of crimson velvet and shimmering jewels, now sealed forever inside a coffin of cold, heavy lead. No creaking lid, no whispered prayers at the graveside, just stone upon stone, guarding a secret none may unearth. Over the centuries, historians and scientists have pored over every scrap of evidence they find. There are the threads of her royal wardrobe bustles and gowns, so tightly laced you can almost hear the corset's bones creaking. Conservators note the extreme contours. A waist pinched to the width of a sapling's trunk, ribs shifted unnaturally, hips raised higher on one side as though shaped by invisible hands. Then there are the carved effigies and death masks, the latter cast from her very skin. Stare at their faces long enough, and you'll catch the slightest asymmetry in the jawline, the subtle slump of one shoulder, the faint furrow between brow and cheek. But of course, none of that touches the truth locked away beneath the Abbey's floorboards. Modern chemical analyses of residual foundation powders, microscopic flakes clinging to museum relics, revealed lead concentrations hundreds of times above what we consider safe today. That toxic blush, once applied daily to preserve her alabaster complexion, seeped through her pores and into her bloodstream, quietly corroding her organs from within. It's a ghastly reminder that beauty rituals of old could be literal death traps. Then there's the whispered theory of Turner syndrome, or perhaps another endocrine disorder that might explain her lifelong virginity and inability to bear children. In the 17th century, such diagnoses didn't exist, so political theatre became the narrative. Elizabeth as the Virgin Queen, wedded only to her nation. Yet behind that political myth could have been a very human pathology: ovaries underdeveloped, hormones out of balance, physical pain concealed beneath layers of silk and courtly ceremony. Despite these tantalizing clues, every proposal to exhume her remains for DNA testing, CT scans, or direct chemical assays has been met with the same stone-cold refusal. The Church of England and successive monarchs argue that disturbing her tomb would violate its sacredness and threaten a cornerstone of national heritage. After all, Elizabeth is not simply a queen in the history books. She's an icon of Protestant triumph, a symbol of divine favor. To let scientists pry open her leaden coffin would be, in their view, sacrilege. And so her legacy remains a tapestry woven of two threads: unparalleled glory and hidden tragedy. On one hand, she is the Golden Queen who vanquished the Spanish Armada, patronized Shakespeare, and shaped an empire. On the other, she is a woman who may have suffered from heavy metal poisoning, chronic illness, and untold loneliness, her secrets locked away beneath the Abbey's cold stones. Picture a modern laboratory, filled with whirring machines and probing lights, illuminating vials of ancient pigments. Researchers beam their scans onto glowing screens, reconstructing a three-dimensional skeleton from marble effigy data. They map the curvature of her spine, note the uneven set of her hips, and highlight the faint shadow of a lesion on her left clavicle. Yet, despite all their technical wizardry, they can only whisper about her true condition. They riffle through archival letters, checking for references to unexplained fevers or mysterious rashes. They compare accounts of her public vigor with tales of private delirium. But when they ask to open the coffin, they are met with well-rehearsed denials. The tomb is inviolable. National treasures must remain undisturbed. Respect the sanctity of her final resting place. And therein lies the heart-wrenching paradox. Elizabeth I endures as a legend of resilience and power, yet her most intimate mortal details are entombed forever. We celebrate her in every history class, every museum gallery, every printed portrait shimmering with idealized perfection. But hidden beneath that perfection is a body ravaged by the very tools of courtly beauty and political necessity. So what do we take from this? Perhaps it's a reminder that every triumph carries its own shadow, every crown its hidden weight. Power and prestige can cloak the most profound vulnerabilities. And sometimes, the greatest mysteries lie not in grand battles or bold declarations, but in the silent decay of a single mortal frame. As you imagine the hush beneath those ancient stones, know this: Elizabeth's story remains alive in our questions as much as in our answers. We honor her brilliance and her suffering alike, acknowledging that her legacy is both radiant and sorrowful. And though her coffin stays sealed, the tales we piece together from threadbare garments, effigial casts, and microscopic pigment give us a glimpse, however fragmentary, of a woman who navigated both triumphant glory and heartbreaking fragility. In the end, Elizabeth I lives on not just in monuments and verse, but in the ongoing curiosity that refuses to let her rest in quiet obscurity. Her tale is a testament to the complexity of human greatness and the silent costs that often accompany it. And as long as we keep asking questions, her legend, glorious and tragic, will continue to captivate our imaginations, a story sealed beneath stone yet ever echoing in our pursuit of truth. Ever since ascending the throne, Elizabeth had treated her royal person almost like a grand science experiment. Only she was both the subject and the unwitting guinea pig. Every morning, her attendants would present the Queen with an array of cosmetics, so dazzling you'd think they belonged in a wizard's cabinet. jars of pearly white face paint laced with lead carbonate, meant to give her that ethereal, unearthly glow. Next came the musk-laden perfumes, drops of ambergris and civet, blended into rose oil that clung to her skin like a fragrant second layer. And if that weren't enough, her meals were served in porcelain dishes, glazed with a thin coating of lead. Even her drinking goblets imparted trace amounts of the metal into her wine and water. At first glance, it all seemed part and parcel of courtly splendor. A queen who shone like a beacon, her every eyebrow arch and fingertip dusted in pallid perfection. But behind the facade, a slow-acting poison was weaving its way through her body. Lead carbonate from the makeup settled into her skin, then seeped into her bloodstream. Every spritz of musk perfume carried microscopic lead particles that she inhaled, lodging deep in her lungs or circulating onward. With each meal, the lead-laced glaze on her plates and chalices released tiny toxins, ingested and absorbed. Over the years, that steady drip of poison began to exact a terrible toll. Her liver, once thought to be the seat of vitality, started to falter under the metal's corrosive embrace. Cells died off, replaced by hardened tissue, until the organ itself felt like stone beneath a physician's hand. Kidney function followed the same tragic arc. Healthy, fluid, processing filters turned into fibrous lumps, unable to purify her blood effectively. And the most insidious effect of all? Chronic, bone-cracking headaches that left her restless and drained, as if her very skull were being squeezed in an invisible vice. In the court's hidden chronicle, an unofficial journal kept under lock and key, there are entries noting that Elizabeth occasionally summoned her royal physicians and lamented, "It aches as though my bones have been broken in a dozen places." But the doctors of the time, lacking any concept of heavy metal toxicity, scribbled only diagnoses of general debility or consumption. They prescribed mild tonics, gentle rest, perhaps a poultice of rose petals and wine, entirely missing the root cause, a slow, unrelenting siege of lead poisoning. Still, Elizabeth refused to let any sign of frailty mar her public persona. Come rain or shine, she would mount her horse with regal composure, riding out to review troops or patronize military drilling. She held court, dispensing policies that shaped the future of England, advising dukes and earls on matters of statecraft. Her speeches rang with unwavering confidence, each decree delivered with a clarity that masked the grinding pain within. Behind that dazzling smile, though, she endured moments so agonizing they left her doubled over in private corridors, hand pressed to her forehead, willing the pounding to cease. Even during times of military crisis, when alliances shifted like quicksand and the rumour of a phantom husband, James VI of Scotland, her distant cousin, hovered at the edge of conversation, Elizabeth clung to her crafted tragedy as part of her immortal myth. In an age when monarchy was theatre, she was both playwright and lead actor, using her personal suffering as a prop to bolster her image of stoic endurance. By exhibiting unshakable faith and cheer amid invisible agony, she cemented her legend as the invincible Virgin Queen. Yet that very pride became her greatest prison. To admit any weakness, no matter how brief or buried, would shatter the carefully forged illusion. So she concealed every bruise, every anguished cry, every sleepless night. Attendants who caught her wincing in pain were sworn to secrecy. Physicians who requested further examination were gently but firmly dismissed. Any suggestion that her plight might be more than simple exhaustion was quietly quashed. As a result, Elizabeth's body became a macabre laboratory for death. Each application of lead-based powder, each luxurious feast served on glazed plates, and each breath of perfumed air fed the poison. It circulated relentlessly, stripping away her health cell by cell. Her liver and kidneys long since turned to near-solid masses, her mind shadowed by chronic headaches, and her nerves frayed by constant pain. And yet, to the outside world, she remained the embodiment of real perfection, her very mortality obscured by layers of ceremony and silence. It's a haunting paradox. The same tools that elevated Elizabeth to an almost divine status, her makeup, her perfumes, her tableware, were also the instruments of her undoing. Her relentless determination to preserve an image of unassailable strength guaranteed that no one would question her condition. And so the lead did its insidious work in the dark, gnawing at her from within, while she continued to rule with unwavering authority. So what can we take from this? Perhaps it's a cautionary tale about the dangers of hiding behind a mask, literal or figurative. Pride and the desire for perfection can become shackles that prevent us from seeking help or revealing our true vulnerabilities. Elizabeth's story reminds us that outward glory can conceal devastating truths, and that sometimes the greatest courage lies in showing our wounds rather than burying them beneath layers of pretense. As we wrap up this chapter of Elizabeth's hidden struggle, remember that behind every legend lies a very human story, one filled with complexity, pain, and unintended consequences. And though Elizabeth crafted her own myth of invincibility, the reality of her condition speaks volumes about the fragile boundary between strength and suffering. So the next time you admire a radiant public figure, consider the unseen battles they may be fighting, battles that remind us of our shared humanity beneath every crown and title. Imagine a scene steeped in shadows, where royal physicians sworn to secrecy under penalty of death crept one by one into a frigid chamber reserved only for the highest blood. They came bearing little more than oil lanterns, a folding operating table draped in linen, and an array of gleaming metal instruments, each painstakingly sterilized. But more than scalpels and hooks, they carried a gnawing dread in their bones. Their first task was grim: examine the Queen's liver and kidneys. Yet among her ruined organs, none held more terror than what they found beneath her left collarbone. There, tucked just under the bone, lay a soft, swollen mass, its surface inflamed and bright red, oozing pus and blood in a nauseating, ceaseless trickle. In hushed tones, the doctors dubbed it the devil's flesh, half in horror, half in awe. Some whispered it was a chronic abscess, a hideous pocket of infection, festering for who knows how long. Others, braver or perhaps simply more medically curious, murmured the word cancer, a term almost unknown in Elizabeth I's era. Consider the implications. A tumour steadily gnawing at a queen's flesh, concealed beneath gowns of velvet and satin. The physicians suspected it had been there for years, each midnight hour seeing Elizabeth's loyal attendants secretly wrap the sore in cloth soaked in wine and medicinal herbs. Imagine those clandestine dressing changes: needles piercing skin, strips of linen stiff with tincture, performed in darkness far from the eyes of dukes and earls. Every stitch, every bandage whispering of pain that no courtier could ever glimpse. This grotesque growth became the ultimate paradox of her reign. Opulent pageantry masking a raw, unspoken agony. On one hand, the Queen's sumptuous attire, sparkling jewels, sumptuous fabrics projected unassailable majesty. On the other, hidden beneath those layers, was a medical secret she could never reveal. Even the most astute nobles dared only to murmur cautionary rumors. The Virgin Queen bleeds unseen, mind your step if you approach her. Fear of the tumor transcended mere personal threat. It whispered of something far more deadly: the shattering of her invincible image. Think about the stakes here. Elizabeth I built her legend on the notion of unbroken strength, victorious over armies, unwed and thus wedded to her kingdom alone. Her bodily integrity was political doctrine, but the silent persistence of that tumor represented a looming betrayal of her own narrative. To admit vulnerability would unravel the myth she had spent decades weaving. And yet, to hide the tumor, to let it fester in secret, was to risk her dignity and perhaps the stability of the entire realm. The physicians, each torn between their oath to heal and their oath to silence, documented the tumor in cryptic entries. One doctor recorded in trembling script, "Soft mass, relentless discharge." Another added, "Patient endures with stoic grace." These notes, locked away in private vaults, stand as the only testament to that hidden horror. Meanwhile, Elizabeth continued her public performances, holding court with regal authority, granting audiences, discussing policy with advisors. All the while, beneath her ruffled collar and jewel-encrusted bodice, the tumor pulsed a quiet drumbeat of mortality. Picture those late-night corridors, servants scurrying with candles flickering in their hands. The hush that fell whenever the Queen passed by, an unspoken agreement that no one would look too closely at her left shoulder. Imagine the small talk halted as she entered a room, replaced by respectful silence, for none dared pry into her pain. And if a careless remark slipped, "Your Majesty looks a touch fatigued today." The offender would face withering rebuke or worse. The tumour's terror extended beyond the flesh. It reached into the very etiquette of the court. And what of the nobles who sensed something amiss? They shared whispers in hushed tones. "Beware the queen's silent wound," they cautioned each other. Some interpreted the tumour as an ominous prophecy. If her body could not triumph over disease, how could her empire stand against external threats? In a kingdom perched precariously between Catholic Europe and Protestant fervour, the Queen's unyielding form was the last rampart. A blemish, literal or rumoured, could invite enemies to exploit her weakness, stoking rebellion or religious upheaval. Thus, the tumour became a double-edged sword, hidden for the sake of national stability, yet ever threatening to slice through the veneer of imperial grandeur. Elizabeth's personal tragedy melded with the political drama of the age, her silent suffering echoing in every stone of her palaces. In that grim calculus, the choice to conceal the abscess was both an act of defiance and an act of desperation. It preserved the myth but accelerated the decay both of her body and, perhaps, of the illusion of eternal sovereignty itself. And so, in the shadowed recesses of history, we recognize the cruel irony. Elizabeth I, who defied marriage to remain the steadfast bride of England, was undone by a hidden bridegroom of her own flesh, a tumour she could never wed, never conquer, and never expose. In the end, her greatest battle may not have been against foreign invaders or rebellious nobles, but against the unrelenting advance of a disease she could neither publicly acknowledge nor privately defeat. As we piece together this fragment of her story, we glimpse the woman behind the crown, resolute, dignified, and seared by secret pain. And we are reminded that even the mightiest legends carry within them wounds left unchecked. For Elizabeth I, victory in war and politics came at the cost of a private war beneath her own skin, one she fought in silence, alone, until her final breath. Since taking the throne, Elizabeth's political power was inextricably bound to her title as the Virgin Queen, her lifelong pledge to rule England alone rather than bind herself to any mortal husband. Behind the ornate doors of the Royal Library, hidden in secret ledgers, there are even offhand jottings in the Queen's own hand. "I am the bride of England." She used that phrase as both a playful quip and a solemn vow, deftly sidestepping any hint of marital intimacy that might betray her claim of undivided devotion to the realm. Fast forward to the dimly lit antechamber, where her unofficial autopsy took place. Oil lamps guttering, shadows flickering across stone walls, and the physicians made a discovery so startling it felt almost sacrilegious. Beneath layers of clothing and silk, they examined her reproductive organs and found her uterus shrunken and withered like ancient parchment. No visible blood vessels snaked across its surface. No soft tissues remained. It was as dry and brittle as a forgotten scroll. In the medical worldview of the 17th century, that was a miraculous sign of pure chastity, divine confirmation that she remained untouched by any husband's embrace. Yet, in our modern era, experts peer through the lens of genetic science and suspect a very different story: Turner syndrome. This chromosomal disorder, where a female is born missing one X chromosome, leads to underdeveloped ovaries, primary amenorrhea, and often chronic pains and cardiovascular concerns. Imagine living with that diagnosis at a time when no one understood chromosomes or hormones, endless questions without answers, only whispers among nursemaids and secret groans behind palace doors. To maintain her image, Elizabeth hid this reality with the same care she used to conceal her wartime strategies. Every morning her maidens would dress her in layers of fine brocade and place jeweled girdles at her waist, all to project an air of perfect womanhood. But beneath those silken gowns lay a body that could not produce heirs, a truth she could never admit either to her counselors or to herself. It was a secret as tightly bound as any treaty, known to only a handful of confidants, sworn to absolute silence on pain of banishment or worse. Politically, the vow of virginity was gold. It turned her into a symbol of unbreakable loyalty. Elizabeth I, wedded only to her people, immune to the usual power struggles that plagued royal marriages. Her courtiers sold her speeches about being the bride of my realm as poetic declarations of sovereignty. Foreign diplomats marveled at her independence, often remarking that no monarch before had so deftly used personal status to wield power on the European stage. In an era when marriage was often a tool of diplomacy, her refusal to wed upended centuries of statecraft and ushered in a new model, the single, self-possessed ruler. But all the while, her body was a battlefield. Chronic pains, perhaps from underdeveloped reproductive organs or related endocrine imbalances, ebbed and flowed, forcing secret visits to royal physicians in private chambers. When she lamented, "It aches as though my bones have been broken," her doctors could offer only vague diagnoses of consumptive malaise. They had no concept of Turner syndrome or pituitary deficiencies that might drive her pain. Instead, they prescribed rest, light tonics, and reassurance treatments as powerless as they were polite. The stakes of disclosure were astronomical. To admit to an inability to bear children would undermine the Tudor succession, risk emboldening pretenders, and throw the kingdom into potential civil war. It would hand Catholic rivals their most potent propaganda, suggesting Elizabeth was cursed by God for her heretical reforms. In a time of religious wars and fragile alliances, her personal health was a matter of state security. So she carried on the grand performance. At court, she would hold audiences with unflappable poise, distributing charters and knighthoods, dispensing mercy with a single raised hand. When she rode out to review her troops, she was the perfect picture of martial grace, armored and poised atop her horse, her hair powdered to shimmer like moonlight, her corset laced so tightly, it forced her posture into a regal stalwartness. All the while, that withered organ and its hidden affliction whispered threats behind her ribs. Think about the boldness of that. Presenting a facade of immortal strength, while struggling with a deeply personal medical secret that no one could treat, no one could truly understand. It was a choice of power over health, reputation over relief, myth over medicine, and in making that choice, she became both the author and the prisoner of her own legend. When the physicians eventually documented her shrunken uterus, their notes read like a medieval miracle, proof of divine favor. But if they had known what we know now, they might have seen a treatable, or at least diagnosable medical condition. Instead, their records laid the groundwork for centuries of speculation and rumor. Modern historians sift through these hidden entries with a mix of awe and pity, imagining the silent agony that followed Elizabeth from private chambers out into the public eye. By the end of her 50-year reign, Elizabeth's body had become a relic of statecraft, its truths buried under layers of ceremony and custom. Her death sealed the pact. A queen who lived on her own terms, whose personal suffering remained forbidden knowledge, whose power was both undeniable and entirely dependent on the secrets she took to the grave. In the final analysis, Elizabeth I teaches us a stark lesson: that strength often hides vulnerability, and that the greatest political weapon can also be the heaviest personal burden. Her secret illness was not merely a matter of private health, but the linchpin of a national myth. And when a myth depends on concealment, it's only a matter of time before the truth demands to be heard. Picture this. Beneath the ancient stones of Westminster Abbey, Elizabeth I lies entombed in a lead-lined coffin, her final privacy guaranteed by both chilling rock and even chillier royal decree. There she rests, sealed away since 1603, safeguarded by the crown and the church, whose combined power stretches unbroken through centuries. Now let's be real. You'd think with today's technology we'd have peered inside by now, right? DNA testing, high-resolution CT scans, chemical assay science has done it all on everything from pharaohs to dinosaurs. Yet every petition from forensic experts and medical historians has been met with the same curt answer: nope, out of bounds, preserve the sanctity of the tomb. And so, the legend grows. But that doesn't mean clues don't exist. Museums across Britain house Elizabeth's surviving ensembles, corsets that whisper of impossible extremes, gowns whose waistlines defy human anatomy. Conservators examining these garments note precisely where the boning has creased both fabric and flesh, suggesting constriction so severe it would shift ribs out of place. Imagine squeezing into a garment so tight your body adapts, one shoulder height slightly higher, hips tilted to compensate. That's not fashion, it's a mechanism of state control, each stitch binding her physique to the image of unshakable poise. Then there are the funeral effigies, marble and wood statues carved directly from her death mask and skeletal measurements. At first glance, they look serene, her hands folded, a tranquil expression on her face. But look closer. The jawline is just ever so slightly lopsided. One shoulder droops a fraction lower. The angle of the neck subtly tilts off-center. These are not artistic flourishes. They faithfully reflect the physical asymmetries that lingered at her passing. Fast forward to the 21st century, where enterprising researchers wheeled in portable X-ray fluorescence devices and high-resolution CT scanners. Unable to touch the tomb itself, they trained their gadgets on the effigies and alabaster death masks prominently displayed in museum chapels. Layer by layer, they mapped density variations to reconstruct a digital skeleton. Behold, a spine with a gentle but unmistakable curve, moderate scoliosis, likely exacerbated by decades of rigid corsetry, ribs depressed on one side, a thorax squeezed like a vice. A computational overlay even highlighted a lingering discoloration on the left clavicle, a shadowy blotch that aligns with historical accounts of a secret abscess or possible tumor. But that's not all. Microscopic fragments of the lead-based face powder, flaked from funeral attire and trapped in the statue's seams, underwent elemental analysis. The result? Lead concentrations so astronomically high that even a dip of a quill into Elizabeth's dinner cup could have sufficed to slowly but surely poison her organs. Scientific journals now brim with graphs showing lead levels in her preserved makeup levels hundreds of times over modern safety thresholds. This wasn't occasional exposure. It was a daily protocol, an aesthetic choice whose toxic legacy still clings to our tools of inquiry. Yet, despite these tantalizing breadcrumbs, the lead coffin remains shut. Every exhumation request, "We need just a milligram of bone," has been quashed. The Church cites the sanctity of royal interment. The monarchy invokes the inviolability of heritage. We cannot play archaeologist with a sovereign's remains, they say, and point to legal statutes that bind the abbey in layers of ecclesiastical and royal privilege. So the truth stays buried, while whispers swirl in lecture halls and online forums. Was she marred by metal poisoning? Did her obsession with unblemished beauty literally eat her alive? Was her spine bent by fashion's demand for a cinched waist? And what of the rumor that her death mask, long thought pristine, actually shows faint traces of dried blood in the nasal passage, evidence of systemic infection, or perhaps the final desperate gasp of a queen in agony? What remains undeniable is the duality of her legacy. On one hand, a sovereign of breathtaking influence whose reign ushered in an English golden age. On the other, a mortal woman whose body bore the marks of unrelenting pressure, physical, societal, and chemical. Her name evokes triumph. The Virgin Queen, guardian of Protestant England, vanquisher of the Spanish Armada. Yet beneath that triumphant veneer lies a story of slow annihilation, of a flesh and bone vessel eroded by pride, by politics, and by lead. And so, year after year, visitors tread the abbey's stone floors, pausing at the understated monument marking her tomb. They admire the austere elegance, recite her enduring epithet, but rarely ponder the silent woes buried underneath. Meanwhile, scholars continue to gather their virtual reconstruction data, refine their isotopic studies, and publish papers arguing for one more scientific expedition, always to be denied. In the end, Elizabeth I stands or lies as a testament to the power of myth and the cost of perfection. The abbey's stones guard her form, but they cannot guard her memory from the persistent curiosity of posterity. We piece together her life in fragments, a corset bone here, a CT line scan there, a flake of white powder in a museum display. Each clue chips away at the legend, even as it solidifies the myth of an impervious monarch. So, as we close this chapter, remember that history often lives in the shadows cast by our monuments. Elizabeth's lead coffin may be sealed, But the questions continue to reverberate. What price did she pay for the crown? How many secrets does her tomb keep? And might we one day summon the courage to pry it open, unearth the bones, and finally give voice to the queen who spoke only through shadows? Until then, we keep on asking, and let the stones of Westminster Abbey hold their silence. Deep in the rolling hills of Gloucestershire lies the quiet village of Bisley, where a whisper took root and grew into the legend of the Bisley Boy. According to this eerie tale, the true infant son of Anne Boleyn met an untimely end, not out of cruelty, but to spare both mother and realm Henry VIII's wrath. In a desperate bid to keep the Tudor line intact, the court allegedly spirited away a local boy, training him in secret to assume the infant princess's identity. Imagine that. A ragged child, plucked from a village inn, taught courtly manners, tutored in royalty's every nuance, and sworn to a lifetime of silence. Fast forward 45 years, and that same boy, now queen, stood at the pinnacle of power as Elizabeth I. Yet in the dim corners of taverns and market squares, keen-eyed gossips noted her odd physique. They said her arms were unnaturally long, swinging with a grace more akin to a man's reach than a woman's. Her ribcage, too, seemed broader than any high-born lady's, as if she'd been squeezed into a corset woven for someone quite different. And then there were her hips, too narrow, lending an almost masculine taper to her silhouette. These whispers, harmless enough on paper, gained traction when a few steadfast attendants, pillars of loyalty, later swore they recognized those long legs and unfamiliar proportions, even as they dressed her for state occasions. The real bombshell, though, came after her death. Two of those same attendants, among the select few permitted to prepare the Queen's body for burial, are said to have glimpsed something that stole their breath away. Behind the layers of crimson velvet and beneath the lead-lined coffin lid, they saw what they described only in terrified hush. A form they instinctively knew was not the body of a woman. They felt the sway of a narrower hip, the curve of a more angular jaw, and in that moment, the legend of the Bisley Boy seemed terrifyingly plausible. And then, as if the air itself demanded it, they were commanded to speak of nothing, sworn to an oath of silence as chilling as the Abbey crypt itself. Most establishment historians have since hurled that rumour into the realm of the absurd, chalking it up to anti-royalist gossip or over-imaginative balladeers. Yet the very secrecy surrounding Elizabeth's final rites only fuels the flames of doubt. Key personal diaries and letters of her closest attendants vanished, some say destroyed, others say locked away in vaults no one can access. The lead coffin remained sealed, a perfect symbol of a narrative refusing to be pried open. And court painters, ever mindful of protocol, rendered Elizabeth's portraits with a gentle androgyny, a strong jawline that seemed almost square, shoulders squared with a hint of masculine breadth, a stance that spoke of unwavering strength but also raised eyebrow at authenticity. In modern galleries, viewers lean in toward these canvases, marveling at the subtle interplay of light and shadow in her cheekbones, wondering if the artist unconsciously captured something more than regal poise. Did the painter see an imperceptible difference in bone structure, or did the legend seep into the brushwork, colouring every stroke with insinuation? These portraits, plastered on the walls of history textbooks and high-end coffee table books, carry with them a question mark that refuses to fade. And so the Bisley Boy theory lingers, like a ghost in the grand halls of Tudor scholarship. It reminds us that when power is built on deception, no matter how well-intentioned any fragment of truth, however small, can become dynamite. A misplaced corset bone here, a slipped seam there, a spectator's whispered rumour in the dark all conspire to crack the facade of a legend. Elizabeth's reign, so meticulously curated, ultimately became a performance in 3 acts. Birth under mystery, life under myth, death under silence. Perhaps the most fascinating part of this legend is how it speaks to our collective fascination with identity and the lengths to which a state will go to preserve its narrative. The Bisley Boy story isn't just about a potential royal switcheroo. It's about the fragility of public image and the terror of what might lurk beneath a carefully painted surface. Imagine living under the pressure of knowing your body, your very biology could undermine the very throne you occupy. No wonder Elizabeth's private life was so fiercely guarded, her physicians so painfully discreet. Ask yourself, if a single rumour about mismatched hip bones could unsettle the foundations of an empire, what else might history be hiding? In every sealed archive, in every portrait with a tilted gaze, in every cloak hiding more than just fabric, there lies a kernel of doubt. And when that seed of doubt takes root, it can sprout whispers that spread like wildfire, especially when the official record speaks only of triumphs and divine favor. So yes, the Bisley Boy theory may never claim a place in the canonical history books, but it endures in the spaces between fact and fiction. It compels us to look closely at the things we take for granted and to remember that every empire, every monarch, every untouchable legend has its shadows. Elizabeth I, for all her brilliance and impact, may well have been both queen and imposter, both sovereign and secret. And that duality, that tantalizing sliver of uncertainty, is precisely what makes her story so captivating, generation after generation. When we gaze upon her portraits, or stroll through Westminster Abbey, or sip a modern glass of wine, thankfully lead-free, let us remember the power of a whisper. The Bisley Boy legend reminds us that in the theatre of history, even the smallest rumour can steal the show, and that sometimes the truth is the most explosive performance of all. The instant Elizabeth breathed her last, the machinery of state shifted into an almost martial posture, yet not to organise a grand funeral, but to seize absolute control of every whisper of news. Within moments, a royal decree of absolute silence coursed through the palace corridors like a shockwave. No proclamation was to mention her physical condition. No cleric was permitted even a murmur about the secret autopsy. The new King James VI of Scotland, now James I of England, was quietly advised to avoid any public discussion of the cause of death, lest he ignite a full-blown crisis of faith among his Protestant subjects. Every preacher across the realm was instructed to extol only her triumphs: the shattering of the Spanish Armada, the consolidation of the Reformation, the fortress-like defence of England against Catholic resurgence. Church bells still rang, but sermons pivoted away from mortality and toward divinity. Parishioners who expected condolence on a queen's passing instead heard thunderous paeans of patriotic glory. It was as though the very notion of her corporeal decay was deemed sacrilegious. But beneath the veneer of these stately tributes, the common folk whispered. In the alleys of London and the hearths of village inns, black and white broadsheets circulated crudely printed woodcuts of a gaunt, hollow-eyed corpse draped in royal velvet. The stark image sent shivers through anyone who glimpsed it. Elizabeth's face drawn and sunken, her ribs visible beneath stretched skin. Holders of these illicit leaflets spoke in low tones of betrayal, of monarchs undone not by enemies abroad, but by secrets at home. As whispers spread, Catholic factions pounced. Secret presses whirred in rural barns and deserted farmhouses, churning out pamphlets declaring that the Virgin Queen had been betrayed by God. These clandestine gospels painted her as an apostate, a figure punished by divine wrath for her heretical reforms. In the green lanes of the countryside, recusant priests slipped these tracts beneath farmhouse doors, depicted her as the enemy of the one true church. They drew lurid comparisons between her rotting flesh and England's spiritual rot, hoping to erode Protestant confidence from the ground up. The court responded in panic. Midnight edicts demanded the seizure and destruction of all unauthorized prints. Agents of the Crown conducted raids on suspected print shops. Volumes of recusant literature were hurled onto bonfires in public squares. Anyone caught harboring these heretical seditions risked imprisonment, fines, or worse. Justiceing the crackdown, officials proclaimed that such materials threatened not only the memory of a beloved queen, but the very stability of the new king's reign. Meanwhile, Protestant ministers were reminded again and again that they must speak only of Elizabeth's pure devotion and divine calling. No mention of physical decline, no allusion to autopsy rumours. Instead, pulpits rang with verses praising her chastity. She was wed to England, not to man. Hymns lauded her as a living saint, her body portrayed as incorruptible despite all evidence to the contrary. The psychology was simple. If you never mention the wound, it can never fester in the popular imagination. This policy of silence stretched beyond the mourning period. It became woven into the fabric of governance. Official histories omitted any awkward details. Chroniclers who once prided themselves on thoroughness now hewed strictly to the authorized line. Court Painters, under subtle pressure, softened shadow and contour in later portraits, smoothing cheekbones and downplaying any hint of fatigue in her pose. The myth of the untouchable sovereign remained pristine, yet rumour is a stubborn creature. Travellers returning from the north spoke of whispered conversations in roadside taverns. Sailors docked at Plymouth traded tales of a queen who died not in majesty but in quiet torment. Even foreign ambassadors, diplomatically restrained, could not help but ask in anxious asides, might her death signal a weakening of England's divine favour? In continental courts, those questions carried even more weight, casting a pall over negotiations and alliances. Back in the palace, the Privy Council held secret meetings by candlelight. They reviewed intercepted correspondence, coded letters between recusant peers, and love letters turned treatises of dissent. Each note was a potential spark to ignite rebellion or religious revolt. They ordered every suspicious courier detained, every carriage searched. The palace gates, once symbols of open sovereignty, now stood as barriers against truth itself. And through it all, the people learned a harsh lesson. When power is built on secrecy, silence can feel like an iron chain. A monarch's body, once a symbol of unity, became a source of fear. To speak of it was to risk one's liberty, even one's life. The very act of remembrance became restricted to choreographed ceremonies, each more elaborate than the last, each more determined to drown out the stench of reality with the perfume of pageantry. For decades indeed, for centuries, the decree held firm. Elizabeth's corpse remained sealed, her secrets locked in lead and stone. Schoolchildren learned of her as a paragon of virtue and strength. Bards penned legends of her undying spirit. And yet beneath every hymn, beneath every stately procession, the echo of that unspoken truth lingered. That a queen once mighty and seemingly indestructible had succumbed to forces both medical and mortal, and that the realm had chosen silence over disclosure. In the end, the absolute silence policy did more than suppress one scandal. It birthed a tradition of myth, making that shaped England's memory of its greatest monarch. It taught the world that some secrets are deemed too dangerous to share, that the image of unblemished power outweighs any desire for candor. And so the mystery endures, a shadow in the halls of history, where every stone and every whispered legend reminds us that sometimes silence is the loudest roar of all. Since the 19th century, a steady chorus of historians, paleopathologists, and forensic experts has quietly petitioned to exhume Elizabeth I's lead-lined coffin beneath Westminster Abbey. Their goal? To finally apply modern science DNA sequencing, high-resolution CT scans, chemical assays of her very bones, and definitively answer the burning question, what exactly killed the Virgin Queen? Were her organs ravaged primarily by lead poisoning? Did scoliosis or other skeletal deformities play a role? Each tantalizing proposal has been met with a resolute veto from both the Church of England and the Crown, invoking the twin banners of sacred heritage and religious sanctity. Faced with that unyielding wall of protocol, some scientists have redirected their efforts toward what can access: the tiniest surviving fragments of Elizabeth's famed white lead foundation. Conservators at the British Museum and private research labs have meticulously scraped microscopic samples from her preserved gloves, coronation robes, and fragments of her death masks. Their elemental analyses revealed lead levels so astronomically high, hundreds of times above modern safety limits, that even a single swipe of her powder could have delivered a chronic, insidious dose. That lead, they concluded, was enough to slowly destroy liver cells, calcify renal tissue, and inflict relentless neurological harm. Meanwhile, imaging specialists have deployed ingenious workarounds to gather anatomical data without disturbing her tomb. Portable X-ray fluorescence units and 3D scanners have been trained on the funeral effigies and alabaster death masks back in museum chapels. Using the shadows in those casts, researchers reconstruct digital skeletons, revealing stark asymmetries. A left ribcage noticeably depressed, a spine curved in mild scoliosis, and a subtle bulge on the left clavicle, consistent with a long-standing lesion or abscess. Match these digital reconstructions to archival accounts of her chronic pain and the unrelenting constriction of her corsets, and the picture that emerges is chilling. A ruler whose very pride in her image cost her both comfort and health. Yet, for all this compelling modern evidence, the Abbey's custodians refuse to budge. Each time a new petition arrives, grant us permission for limited core sampling, they issue the same refusal, citing statutes that protect royal graves from disturbance and insisting that exhumation would desecrate a national shrine. We must preserve our shared past, they say, and respect the final wish of our sovereign. But is honouring her memory truly served by sealing her secrets beneath stone? Consider the larger stakes. If Elizabeth's remains were opened, the genetic tests could confirm familial lineage and perhaps rule out any shadowy claims like the infamous Bisley boy theory, which suggests the real Elizabeth died in childhood and was replaced by a stand-in. More crucially, scientific data could definitively link her decades-long cosmetic regimen to her ultimate physical collapse. It could rewrite textbooks on Tudor health and reshape our understanding of the era's medical knowledge, or lack thereof. But the cultural and political inertia is immense. To disturb a queen's tomb is to challenge centuries of tradition, to invite theological debates about the sanctity of mortal remains, and to risk unleashing a torrent of sensational headlines. Imagine the uproar: Queen's bones stolen for testing, or sacrilege in the Abbey, scientists probe Tudor remains. The potential blowback, both in tabloids and in Parliament, deters even the boldest proponents. So, instead, the scientific community lingers in a half-lit corridor of inquiry. They publish their powder assays and digital models in peer-reviewed journals, cautiously noting that without direct access to skeletal tissue, their conclusions can only remain provisional. Conferences are held at prestigious universities, where slides illustrate the uneven corsetry marks on her gowns and the elevated lead peaks in her cosmetic residues. Scholars debate whether such lead levels could alone account for her neurological decline, or if comorbidities like Turner syndrome or chronic infections played a hidden role. And the Abbey's sealed tomb becomes a symbol of the enduring tension between reverence and curiosity. On the one hand, it's a monument to national identity, the resting place of a monarch whose reign forged a new English destiny. On the other, it is a barrier to truth, a mausoleum of unanswered questions that cry out for resolution. Each passing generation sees celebrity documentaries replay her life, interspersing romanticized reenactments with footage of scientists scanning replicas of her effigy. Yet the camera never pans down to the floor stones above her coffin, never touches that cold, undisturbed slab. In the end, Elizabeth's leaden coffin remains both a literal and metaphoric fortress, protecting her posthumous legend, while simultaneously imprisoning the facts of her physical decline. Her story is told and retold in glittering portraits, in palace tours, and in Sunday school hymns. But the most intimate chapters of her final days remain locked away. We celebrate her unyielding spirit, hail her as a paragon of Protestant resolve, and remember her as a queen who never married her country. Yet beneath that polished narrative, questions fester, about unspoken pain, about the price of perfection, and about whether the weight of silent secrets can crush even the greatest of monarchs. One day, perhaps, the Abbey's stone guardians will relent. Perhaps a new generation of legitimate, respectful researchers will find the moral authority to say, "We honor her memory best by understanding her reality." Until then, the tomb stays sealed, and history continues to circle the mystery chronically curious, forever probing the barriers of tradition, and hoping that someday the Queen herself might be allowed to speak through the scientific lens of our era. Even as the truth of Elizabeth's final decay lay frozen beneath layer upon layer of lead and stone, her legend as the Virgin Queen rose anew in the hearts and minds of artists, writers, and performers, spreading like wildfire through modern pop culture. From sweeping historical novels to glossy television dramas, from the electric glare of the stage to the hushed halls of museums, her image has been painted, projected, and performed with equal parts, pride and melancholy. In Gothic literature, Elizabeth often returns as a ghostly monarch, her hollowed visage glimpsed beneath a tarnished crown, wandering through crumbling corridors of a once magnificent palace. Novelists describe her spectral form drifting past broken tapestries and shattered pillars, face half hidden in decay, yet still exuding an imperious grace that chills the marrow. One chilling passage describes her eyes, once fierce with the fire of empire, now flicker like dying embers in a skull cloaked in velvet. In these tales, she is both sovereign and wraith, embodying power's ability to outlast the flesh, yet unable to outlast death's ravages. Contemporary painters have seized on this motif of stripping away to explore the gulf between outward form and inner truth. Canvases slash through layers of opulent gown and powdered skin to reveal bones veined with lead and sinew stretched thin by corsets. One installation invites viewers to don a replica corset and feel their own breaths grow shorter as the gallery fills with whispered recitations of Elizabeth's last words. Another sculpture features a fragmented death mask hanging by a single chain, its cracked surface reflecting shards of the audience's faces back at them. In these works, each brushstroke and chiseled fragment asks, what price did she pay to appear invincible? On the West End, the musical Lead and Blood has become a sensation, with a score that swells from haunting strings to triumphant brass. The production stages that secret midnight autopsy in vivid, heart-pounding tableau. Smoke curls across the stage as oil lanterns reveal surgeons in powdered wigs and quivering gowns. The lyrics paint a picture of loneliness. In the hush before the dawn, she stands alone, crowned in poison, bound in bone. The lead actress, her voice quavering with sorrow, sings of the Queen's final defiance, "I will not bow to death's decree," even as the corpses of her obsessions lie cold around her. Meanwhile, across smoky club stages, rock and metal bands have embraced the Queen's rotting royalty to soundtrack the collapse of myth itself. The concept album, Poisoned Crown, shreds through 13 tracks of pounding drums and distorted riffs, each song a chapter in Elizabeth's descent. The opening track, White-Lead Widow, snarls. She painted her breath, she painted her face, until the flesh beneath could no longer keep pace. Fans mosh beneath posters of a skeletal monarch, her hair matted with mildew, and her scepter twisted into a rusted iron rod. In the final track, an epic 14-minute closing opus, the singer howls, "No throne of stone can hold a queen who bleeds lead." The Victoria and Albert Museum, never one to shy from controversy, staged its provocative True Face of Power exhibition. Here, vitrines display replicas of death masks cast in translucent resin and rows of corsets so tightly laced you can practically feel the crushing pressure. In a dim alcove, bottles of lead-based cosmetics are arranged like solemn relics, their labels warning of poison long before safety regulations existed. Interactive kiosks let visitors peer at macro photographs of dried powder flakes, each flake a testament to centuries of hidden suffering. A wall scroll in bold type asks, "Is power beauty, or is beauty the instrument of power?" In academic panels held alongside the exhibit, art historians debate the ethics of aestheticizing a queen's secrets. One scholar argues these artworks allow us to confront history's uncomfortable truths, while another warns they risk turning real suffering into sensational spectacle. Yet few can deny the electricity in the air, as crowds move from painting to sculpture to film clip, connecting each piece to the larger tapestry of Elizabeth's mythos. Across all these mediums, novels, stage, music, museum, the core paradox shines through. Elizabeth's enduring allure rests on a foundation of concealment. She is celebrated as the virgin queen who never bent, yet it was her hidden wounds that tethered her so tightly to human fragility. In revealing her decay, artists strip away the gilding to expose the raw, beating heart of her legend. They challenge us to ask whether the power she wielded was worth the price she paid, and whether our own dreams of invulnerability rest on equally perilous illusions. So the narrative lives on, moving from dusty archives into living, breathing art forms. Each retelling is a new layer of myth-making and myth-unmaking, a dance between glamour and gore, sovereignty and suffering. And though Elizabeth's coffin remains sealed in silent defiance, her story continues to echo through galleries, theatres, and concert halls, forever reminding us that behind every crown lies both a throne and a crucible. And so, as we draw the curtain on this shadowed saga of Elizabeth I, let us breathe deeply and allow the rhythm of our own hearts to slow, matching the gentle flicker of candlelight in that long-ago chamber. Beneath her crown, she bore not only the weight of a kingdom, but the quiet ache of a body betrayed by its own beauty, and by the silence she chose to preserve her legend. Tonight, Let us remember her not merely as history's great monarch, imperious and unyielding, but as a woman who hid her scars